Do you want to learn the tricks that top leaders use to get the most out of themselves and their teams? Well, Naftali Hoff is here to help. Lead to succeed. Picks the brains of top leaders to learn about their challenges, insights, and best practices. Here's Naftali.
Hello, Lead to Succeed Nation. It's Naftali Hoff, and welcome to Lead to Succeed, episode 123. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Jeremy Sandell. Jeremy is an online sales and marketing professional with more than $15 million earned in one-to-one sales across 6+ different industries. He spent the last 12 years studying human behavior and evolutionary psychology and has developed a unique non-salesy approach to sales that results in considerably higher than average closing rates in the high-ticket sales niche. Jeremy, I'm so glad to have you on the show today.
Same. Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. And your topic is of great interest to me because I think it's Daniel Pink who says to sell is human. All of us need to be in sales. And certainly if you're someone like myself in coaching and you're constantly thinking about how are you going to make a bigger impact, it's really difficult to do that if you're not selling. So let's go back to the beginning, walk us through your journey a little bit, and specifically, how did you get into sales, which for many people is a scary and perhaps undesirable, almost perceived as sleazy type of industry. So kind of walk us through that a little bit. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you off on the wrong foot, but you understand what I'm saying. I'm sure you get that all the time. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had that same view of sales when I first started. My first sales job, I was doing personal training, and I had a pretty hard job because the first time I stepped in the gym was 3 months after I learned how to be a trainer. So I was like going straight from reading books to going into the gym to then trying to sell people that I was going to be able to help them get in shape. And I think I benefited a lot from the fact that I really had no clue what I was doing. I mean, I was certified to train people, but I didn't have the experience. And my manager was he was a 6'4", probably 250 pounds of muscle guy. And I remembered being scared to talk to people. I'm a very introverted person. When I'm with friends, I'm the quiet guy. And so what happens is he sees me standing around not making sales, and he actually took me and made me go and introduce myself and shake hands with every single person in the gym, because he could tell I was like embarrassed and I was nervous and scared. And I think I got really lucky that he did that, but it was really funny because in the gym everybody's sweating. So nobody noticed that my hands were sweating from being so nervous. My knees were shaking. And so it was it's a funny thing to think about now because it's so normal at this point since I've been doing it for 12 years that I don't really think about it. I'm just talking to people now. But before, it really felt like if I talked to a stranger, like when you're a little kid, your parents say, don't talk to strangers. I really thought something bad would happen to me if I tried to sell people. And now my whole mindset, it's interesting, is completely the other way. I'm actually more worried about not selling people because I'm worried about what might happen to them if I can't get my product into their hands. I'm worried about, am I going to be responsible for their life being less than good or less good than it could have been if I had actually been bold enough to, approach them and try to sell them. And so it's a really, really interesting way that kind of changed over the years.
Yes, you're hitting on a lot of things. It's interesting because I tell this to my audience often. They know that I'm a former head of school and a former educator. And so for the most part, when you're in education, you're really not thinking sales per se. Yeah, you think about, especially for me running an independent school, you think about enrollment. And so you are trying to market, you are trying to make sure that people know about your school and the benefits and all of that. But it's a different kind of selling, and even fundraising is a little bit of a different kind of selling, though the principles I'm sure are very, very similar. And I share introversion with you. Not that I can't have a comfortable conversation or approach a stranger. I do work networking events relatively comfortably, but it's not natural for me. It's not the kind of thing where I want to be there sort of just in this space. I'd much rather be in a quieter space, either working independently or in a small group. So for those who are dealing with introversion and sales simultaneously, I think this conversation certainly would resonate. But I love the fact that I was imagining you were going to say that he literally picked you up by the collar and dragged you over and dropped you in front of people, but probably it was more metaphorical than that. But that's the idea, in effect,
He
saying
could
you got
have.
to do this. But that's something that I realized only, I would say, a little bit belatedly when I transitioned from formal school leadership into the coaching space, is that you really have to be very good and very committed to the sales process, because most people don't just
Yeah.
discover you. You don't just hang a shingle and say, here I am, I'm a coach, I can help you. You could say it, but number one, there are a bunch of other people saying it. So you have to be able to differentiate. In the case of coaching, I think a lot of people still, even today, don't fully appreciate what coaching can do for them. And as a result, it's like one thing, for example, if I'm trying to sell auto mechanic services. So everybody knows if there's a problem with my car, if I'm a doctor, everybody knows that I need certain health related support. But not everybody knows that I need a coach, whether it's a business coach, a personal coach, etc. So that's part of it too. And all of this is happening with me never having been in the sales space officially until that point in time. But the point that I like the most, I'll summarize, and then I want to, transition, hear more about what you have to say, is that piece, the focus on the benefits. Until now, we think about, at least the way I used to think about it is, well, they want to buy my services. It's all about me, and I have to make it as appealing to them as possible. Now the focus is on how can I help them achieve more, and will their lives be somehow incomplete if they don't get the coaching that I offer? In your case, of course, whatever it is that you're selling, product or service. So that mindset shift, that willingness for salespeople to say, I've got a great product, and if I don't get it into people's hands, their lives will forever be limited in some way. That can be very motivating, especially when you're feeling like, I haven't been so successful today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what I've noticed is I have a good analogy that I use when I'm training salespeople. I have a sales team of about 6 people, and we sell products from $2,000 up to $2 million. And the guys that are, starting out, the analogy I always give them is, if you had a fire hose and somebody's house was on fire, you wouldn't think twice about just getting that hose out, putting the fire out. And when it comes to whatever your business is, you have to kind of see it as like your responsibility. It has to feel kind of like an obligation. When I was younger, I worked in the fast food industry, and I remembered at one point, and I don't know if this is, politically correct to talk about, but there was this woman who's morbidly obese. And I remembered she would drive through the drive-through, and my job was to ask her not, if she wants to reconsider her order and go get something healthier, which I think would be better for her. My job was to ask if she wanted to go medium or large instead. And I remembered when I quit that job, that was the thing that kind of drove me over the edge, because this woman was so overweight, her stomach was on the steering wheel. She couldn't move the steering wheel without it like rubbing her stomach. And it was such a visceral thing for me because this woman would come through on a weekly basis. I was like, I don't want this to be the impact that I'm having on the world, that instead of making it better, I'm actually making this person's life worse. And so that analogy that I use with our sales guys, I'm always telling them, I'm like, look, if somebody's building was on fire, you would not think twice about putting it out. They might even get mad. They might say, hey, why are you spraying my building? Because they might not even be aware of the fire when you appear with the hose. But if you really care, you have to do something. You can't wait until the building burns down and then say to them, oh, is it okay if I help you? You just have to be bold enough to go over there and actually help.
Yeah. So I mentioned something in your bio, and I think your answer just now touches on this also, and that's human psychology. You talked about
Mhm.
human behavior and evolutionary psychology. And so I'm curious to know, what drove you to study them, number one? And number two, for our purposes, how did that change your approach? And how do you utilize that in your sales process?
Yeah, so I've always been very fascinated by people. Being like somewhat naturally introverted, I've always liked just watching people. I also wear glasses for people who are just listening in and not watching. And so I've found that I can typically identify people by the way they walk. If I can't see somebody very far away, but I can see the way they're walking, and I've seen them a few times, I can identify them by the way they walk. And in high school, I started figuring stuff like this out, and I started thinking like, why is it that people are doing what they're doing? Like, why do in high school it's like, why do girls not like me, or why do girls like me, or why do people get together, or why do they break up? And so it started with things that are actually really important. I mean, it's really important to have great relationships, but in the context of high school, it's not really that important. Most high schoolers are going to get together and break up. And what I found when I first got into sales was I had already studied a little bit of psychology. I had read a lot of philosophy in high school, and I was kind of like getting stuck because a lot of sales trainings out there, they teach you a lot of very strange tactics that people don't really use in everyday conversation. A good example of this is there's salespeople out there all over the world right now, and they'll say to people something like, if you like everything that I have to show you today, will you just give me a straightforward yes or no at the end of this call? And it's kind of the same as like asking somebody on a date. Like, if you like everything that you have to see today, will you take me home tonight? It's just a very strange way of doing things. And so when I first started learning sales and we might even call it persuasion or negotiation, I found that a lot of the stuff I was learning didn't work and it didn't really make sense and it didn't make me feel good. Like I felt weird trying to box people in because it's very manipulative to do that to people. And people are smart. People can tell when you're doing those kinds of things. They're like, oh, why is this guy making me like have to answer questions instead of just talking to me like a normal person? And so I started reading more psychology books. And one of my mentors, a guy named Ty Lopez, is a big fan of like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung and Dr. David Buss. And Dr. David Buss is more or less known as like the godfather of evolutionary psychology. And it was interesting because his most basic philosophy is that like everything is more or less driven by mating or the desire to mate to continue your life indefinitely through your genetics. So, like basically passing your genes on is a way of living forever. And I remembered reading through his textbook, which for some of your viewers, by the way, they're going to look this up, and it's $400 or $500. There's websites out there that you can get a copy, an older edition of his textbook, which is still just as good for $20 to $50. It's the best $20 to $50 somebody can spend. But that kind of opened my eyes to a lot of the behaviors that in high school I was like, why do people act this way when they're dating? Like, why do people get very like overly defensive? Something you would call like mate guarding in like evolutionary psychology terms. Like, why is it that like they don't want people to talk to their girlfriend or boyfriend now? Like, why is it that they're being very insecure? And learning some of those things when it came to business, it was interesting to see how that translated over because people will, um, it's not fair to say lie, but they lie. I mean, people will be less than honest with the salesperson, because they're trying to protect themselves because essentially money is an asset. It's equal to food, shelter, any of the basic needs. And so what happens a lot of times with people is they will feel like, okay, this person's trying to get something from me. And the etymology of the word sell or to sell actually means to give. So most salespeople are actually doing the wrong thing. They are trying to get something, and people feel that way. And so learning that stuff through evolutionary psychology about how like people are more or less trying to protect themselves, trying to ensure their survival, I started seeing in my sales conversations how that was why people would be less than honest with me. And when I started to kind of find little ways to shift the way I talk to people and um to be strategically less tactical and just like we're talking right now, have a normal conversation. I have a very good script that I work off of, but it's very loose so that people can take conversations where they need to go. That made a huge difference. I mean, I went from really having to work very hard uh, to persuade people to buy things to then feeling like I don't ever really have to close people in the sense that I'm like making them do something. A lot of times they're like, okay, this just makes sense.
So how do you bring people? That's great. And I love everything you were talking about, because, honestly, I don't like to be sold either. I don't like when
Yeah.
people just sort of pitch me and I know where this is going. So how do you transition? Because again, anyone who's listening who's in sales or has people in sales, practically, I'm sort of thinking on their behalf and selfishly on my own. They want to know, yeah, conversations are great. And I'd love to, as we say in Yiddish, schmooze all day. But practically, you're not in the business to pick up the phone just to talk. You do have a bottom line that you're trying to achieve. How do you transition people? Or what would be a great strategy? I know you do a whole training on it, so I'm not asking you to deliver all the goods in this conversation, but maybe you can give us at least one concrete step or concept that we could take and apply specifically to what we do every day.
Yeah, I can give you something really simple that can be used both in sales, but it can also be used in management. And it really centers a conversation. So one of the best things an organization can do in terms of sales is not to necessarily have people cold calling. You can do that and it still works, especially because more people now are scared to pick up the phone and call a stranger because people are so used to sending DMs and emails now. But rather to get leads coming in. And then when you call those people, an easy way to just start a conversation is to say, hey, what are you looking for? Like, what do you want? Um, it's kind of interesting. In the Bible, it says, ask and it shall be given. It's really interesting. If you just ask people what they want, for the most part, they will tell you pretty clearly. And from there, I mean, as far as practical like things people can do, you're basically starting very broad, almost like our conversation right now. We're starting very broad and then slowly throughout the conversation narrowing down to like, okay, do we actually have something that's going to give this person what they want, and solve the problem that they're having and getting that? And that's typically what a business is. I think of businesses in general as like a vehicle, and they're all vehicles. Do they just look different. So it takes people from where they are to where they want to be. And so the thing with a lot of salespeople is they kind of are so stuck in their head about what they want, they're not hearing what people are saying they want. And so they're not really getting anything useful to say, okay, so you want to make more money, but you don't know how to do Facebook advertising. And we have this course. Basically, we're going to teach you one, two, three. This is maybe another practical thing for people to sell. Make it very simple. One, two, three is so incredibly simple. People, if they have, and a lot of people unfortunately have very low self-esteem. If they have low self-esteem, but you basically tell them, look, this, you do these three things and you should get this kind of result. You might have to try a few things and adapt a little bit, but starting broad with just, what are you looking for? And then slowly narrowing down and then making it very simple for people. I found both in selling and then in managing people, it really works very well, and you don't ever have to strong arm people that way. Um, you're helping them to kind of realize along the way what you might already know that they're not aware of. And that's a lot of selling or persuading is basically just taking the knowledge in your head and giving it to other people.
Got it. Okay. So one quick thing on introversion. I know we talked about it before, but you
Hmm.
did mention something again. Again, I like to give it provide a plug, especially because a lot of people view that as a deficit. Oftentimes, introverts are great listeners, great observers. And you talked about your capacity to observe and sort of see the bigger picture. So embrace that. If that is a quality that you have, I certainly encourage everybody to embrace that and utilize it to your advantage. Now, coming back to what you were saying about kind of starting big picture and funneling it down. So the practical question that's in my mind, and very possibly in the minds of others as well, is, you started very broad. What are you looking for? Now, that kind of question, obviously it's going to depend on the context. If somebody's walking into a department store and I say, "Can I help you? What are you looking for?" If they walk into a grocery store, if they're having a conversation in a Best Buy or some kind of tech store, those the starting point is different just based off of where you are. You wouldn't expect someone to come into a department store, for example, and start looking for groceries, usually, right? It's just the wrong place. So by definition, there's a framework already in place that limits the conversation, even though it's a broad question, to a certain, let's call it vertical, or a certain type of conversation that's to follow. When you're reaching
Hmm.
out, what is it about your initial starting point in the conversation that's sufficiently narrow to allow the next step of the what is it that you're looking for to bring it ultimately to where you could be of value, as opposed to being a completely random response that has nothing to do with what it is that you're selling?
Yeah, yeah. So in a business to business model, or even in a business to consumer model, excluding retail, and I'll bring up an example for retail after too. But like in phone sales, as an example, or even over Zoom or anything like that, um, that's the main job the marketing team has to be doing right. They have to have a clear offer that's bringing those people into the business, either as leads or as lower ticket paying customers. So maybe they're buying something for $10 to $100. And then they're either scheduling a call or a salesperson is calling them to sell them maybe something for 500 to 5,000 or $10,000. And so that kind of narrowness will come a lot of times from the leads coming in either through buying something or through filling out a form. Um, when But, but let's say you have a really great website and you have an opt-in for an email address and phone number. And
Mhm.
so they didn't buy anything, they didn't see an ad or anything. They were just on the site and they saw you could get a free
A white
PDF
paper.
on
Yep. Hmm.
exactly. That would be the starting point. It would say, "Hey, I saw you filled out our form about this awesome three-part series on how to add a zero to your revenue this month. What are you really looking for? Like what's the goal in your business? What are you trying to do? Can you give me, and this is another thing, can you give me like a 2 or 3 minute summary?" Um, and the interesting thing is people really love to talk about themselves if you'll just let them. A lot of people feel like nobody really listens to them. And it's really interesting because the better I get at sales, um, the more like kind of sad it is for me because I talk to people and I realize like I might be the only person who really listens to them all day long. And it's really tragic because we're so caught up in our phones and our TVs and everything else. And so if you really listen to people, they will tell you everything you need to know to be able to serve them. And really when you're tuned into trying to do the best for people and trying to uh, and this seems like a silly thing for like a guy who makes money by talking to people to say, but like if you truly want to make the world a better place, being a great salesperson that has a great product, I think is one of the easiest ways to do it because people want somebody to care. They want somebody
Hmm.
to be willing to listen to them and to actually hear what they're saying and be able to help them make their life better. And it doesn't have to be like we do a lot of business training and we do a lot of like consulting. You could do the same thing, like as an example, in a retail setting. I was at a Men's Warehouse about a week ago buying a suit. It's the first time I've ever bought like a nice suit. And the woman that worked there, amazing salesperson, amazing. And I never felt like she was selling me because she really understood what I was there for. She's like, she started with, "Hey, what are you guys looking for?" And I was like, well, I need a suit. And she said, okay, well, what kind of suit? Are you getting married? Are you doing an event? And I said, well, I'm doing a speaking event and I want to kind of be impressive. I want something presidential because I feel like that's a simple way to make an impact, right? Just dress the way presidents dress. They all wear the same suits. And this woman took time with me and worked through, well, you don't want to wear like the red or the blue tie. It's too bold. And that process, the whole time, I mean, I ended up spending $200 more than I wanted to spend when I started and I felt good about it. And it was really just because like she took the time to care and she understood that if she did a great job, my life was going to be better. And it's just a suit, right? I mean, I wore it one day and I'll wear it again maybe 20, 30, 40 times over the course of the next couple of years at speaking engagements. Um, but it mattered enough to her and so every time I wear that suit, I feel better about it because it feels like we put work into making the right choice. And even in retail, some people will say, well, when I ask people, one of the many problems with retail is they'll say to customers, what are you looking for? And customers will say, oh, nothing. In retail, you can cheat a little bit and start by actually complimenting people. It's strange. I compliment people on their shoes a lot because I notice people's shoes because I'm introverted and I'm always looking down. So I'll see people's shoes. I'll be like, wow, those are really cool shoes. And people look like surprised. It's like nobody's ever complimented them on their shoes before. Maybe nobody's ever complimented them in the last year or two of their lives. And the interesting thing is in retail, if you start with a compliment and you mean it, people will open up and then you can say, hey, what do you guys, I see you've got, and you could even name some stuff in their cart and say, I see you've got this. Are you doing a party? Are you doing this? What are you guys doing? Um, if people know that you care, and in retail, people have this belief, the same as like used car salespeople, there's a stigma that like they don't get paid very much, so they don't care. So when somebody says, what are you looking for today? They just assume they're just doing it because they have to do it, not because they actually want to. And it's an interesting, like, it's practical, but it's also kind of vague for a lot of people. If you just care, things tend to work out.
Wow. All right. So I've got one last question. I really wish I could kind of dig deeper. That was like full of goodies. But I do want to transition. But before I do, there's a question I ask all of my guests. And the reason I do is because it really is so important. Someone listening to you, I know you talked about your backstory and you really weren't good at sales or so inclined at the beginning. Not everybody presents in that way. Not everybody shares their dark secrets, so to speak, or their backstory. But tell us, please, one mistake that you made somewhere along your career journey that at the time felt like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. I can't recover from this, but has really set you up for future success.
Yeah, it's not really one thing as it was like there's a great speaker named Jim Rohn. He passed away. He said like the secret to success is like little actions repeated daily, and the secret to failure is the same thing. It's just the wrong actions repeated daily. Not realizing early enough how important being a person of integrity was, I think cost me a lot of success in like I ran an insurance company as an example, and I think I I could have been significantly more successful. I'm very grateful that I wasn't, because I didn't really like what I was doing, but I think I could have been more successful there, if I had really understood that like being more transparent with people actually closes more sales. And I was just too scared sometimes to like tell people, like I didn't want to tell them like, hey, look, you really should have more coverage and you should pay more money, because I was worried that maybe they wouldn't, buy. I was worried maybe I wouldn't get the sale. And in the environment that I was in, my like me eating was dependent on me closing sales. And so I was so scared of not making money and not being able to buy food, that I didn't have the level of integrity that I have now, where I would rather not eat than have to sacrifice my integrity, because in the long run, my integrity will feed me the whole rest of my life. Um, the lack of it could, I mean, cost me everything that I want out of life.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Love it. All right. Rapid fire time. I'm going to start off with a couple of sales ones. I don't know why, but I guess I'll go there. The most awkward response you've ever gotten on a sales call.
Yeah. People just say yeah, and they don't like, I can tell they're not engaged at all.
I got it. Okay. Someone you'd love to sell, but haven't yet.
Oh man, I would have loved to sell somebody really persuasive, like Mother Teresa was really persuasive. I would have loved to have been able to sell her something.
The most expensive sale you've ever made.
Uh, like total dollar amount that they paid
Mm-hmm.
is about 336,000.
Mm. May I ask what kind of product that was?
Yes, I sold 13 forklifts.
Mm. Wow. Okay.
It was
Something
an
that you've
interesting
learned,
sale.
something cool you've learned from Ty Lopez.
Um, the value of being adaptable, and aware. It's crazy how many details just fly right past us all every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the last one, a productivity tip that helps you to get more done.
Planning tomorrow today, like having a journal where I time block the night
Mm.
before saves me at least an hour a day.
Wow. Nice. Okay. Well, Jeremy, this has been fantastic. I'm sure everyone who's been listening would love to get more because you've just scratched the surface with our curiosity and tapped into so many different elements, whether it's sales, psychology, relationships. How can people find you? Where can they learn more about your work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on like all the social media platforms. I'm most active on Instagram and TikTok, at the Jeremy Sandell. And I mean, anybody who has questions, I'm very open. I find that most people actually don't ask enough. Anybody's more than welcome to reach out to me, direct message me, and say, hey, I'm interested in X, Y, and Z. I'm happy to help.
Okay, awesome. All right, Jeremy, here it is, the final life lesson that we'd like to end the episode with, something that you haven't shared already that could just take it to a new level.
Yeah, I'll paraphrase a quote from Carl Jung. He said that when it comes to people's perception of themselves, um, as a rule, they're extraordinarily clouded and diluted. And it's worth considering that the things we might say and think about ourselves are not right. We might be wrong, and even more than that, we might be far below what our actual potential is.
Hmm. Okay, well, we'll keep striving for more, that's for sure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the
Same.
show today. I've learned a ton, and definitely looking forward to getting this out there, and of course, learning more about your sales journey, your expertise, and look, much continued success in all you do.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Same to you.
All right. Be well now.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode and for investing in yourself so that you can lead to succeed. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback gives the show more social proof and encourages more folks to listen.